We should be live right now. Let me double check and make sure that, yes, YouTube says we have an excellent connection. And yeah, today I'm here with a special guest. I'm here with the Thunderous One. And yeah, say hello, Thunderous.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you, Lloyd, for having me on your show.
You're very welcome. No, thank you. I first heard you speak on Reasoned Answers Apologetics. You spoke on atheism, which was to me mind opening. Your knowledge of the subject, the way you laid it out, and of course you spoke on Islam. And yeah, that's why I wanted you on to introduce some of these topics because these are serious issues within Islam. I mean, we view them as amusing, but really these are issues that Islam has no credible answers for, and these are part of the just part of the process of removing these foundations of Islam and hopefully watching it crumble as people realize how false it is. But yeah, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Thunderous One. I'm an ex-Muslim. I've appeared on several YouTube channels. I think we've actually first met several years ago, Lloyd,
Yeah,
on another channel. We lost communication with each other. Then we found each other again, so to speak, on Thaddeus' channel. And here we are now, continuing our dismantling of Islam. You certainly come with an absolutely fantastic, unique perspective of the deep, deep history of Islam and Islamic teachings. I certainly can't follow your footsteps, but I've come with a different angle, something that's
right.
a slight dismantling of what they teach.
No, I think your angle is correct because, quite honestly, when you look at Islam, it comes across as myth, not as history. It comes across as myth and narrative, and you're approaching it, I think, from that perspective, and you're doing, shall we say, an archaeological survey of this myth and narrative and finding, does it match within our knowledge of archaeology, history, facts, and logic?
Yeah, I was motivated, in fairness, by Stop Spamming, who did a discussion on the inheritance breakdown and how the numbers don't stack. And it got me
Right.
to thinking that I can use that kind of the numbers don't stack and apply it to other Islamic teachings, as the demonstration is going to be tonight.
All right. Yep. Will you be sharing your screen at all?
No, I won't be. Sorry, I've come
Okay, no,
unprepared.
just checking in
Everything,
case I needed
everything's
to
on
grab.
my iPad. Sorry, everything's on my iPad.
Okay, now if you had a PowerPoint or something or a Word document, we could have. I would have allowed you to share the screen, but that's fine. That's okay. Yeah. So guys, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope to finish this with by not later than 7:30 p.m. That's Eastern Central Time, Central European Time, because of course I want to do the terminology show at 8 p.m. European Central Time again, which is in 90 minutes, and I need a break between the two to do some things. So, guys, please, if you have questions, please ask. And yeah, so we'll try and finish this in the next 54 minutes at most. And I will let you know. I do hope to have within a few weeks. I do hope to have Thunderous One on again because there's some interesting topics that I think are worth examining, worth discussing, and he's the best person to speak about some of these things that I've heard so far. So yeah, Thunderous, if you want to take it away, and guys, please ask questions.
Okay, everybody. So tonight's discussion, I would like to present to you a hadith that many Muslims don't like to talk about because of the mathematical implications, and that is Islam and 124,000 prophets. So what I'll do is I'll just give you the hadith first. It reads, okay, so this number comes from a hadith in Musnad Imam Ahmad, narrated by Abu Umar al-Bahili, relating the conversation that Abu Dar had with the Prophet. To translate, I said, O Messenger, how many prophets were there? He replied, 124,000, from which 315 were Jama Gafira. So the hadith teaches that Allah sent 124,000 prophets. Now, only about 25 are mentioned in the Quran, all names originating from the Bible alone. Thus, there is a deficit of 123,974. Muhammad has to be included in the 124,000. So, some of the questions that we could, ask ourselves are, or what Muslims should be responding with are, who are they? Where did they live? What did they write? Did they live concurrently or did they live consecutively? Why are they not mentioned? Why are their names not mentioned? Where are the books they revealed? What were the books they revealed? What do these books say, teach, reveal? What languages were they revealed in? What
Right.
languages did these prophets speak? What lands did they go to?
I think those are all reasonable questions to ask. And one could also ask, why is it only that prophets mentioned in the Bible, which Muhammad supposedly had access to, why only them? Why are none of these other prophets named, none of their texts named within the Quran? And of course within the Sunnah, let's say.
Well, on that, that's a very good question you've asked there. I think the reason why only 25 are named is because one has to bear in mind that Muhammad was a traveling salesman. So, as a traveling salesman, he would have likely encountered other religions, other cultures, other political ideologies on his travels, and thus accumulated the names
Right.
as such. Majority of them being from Judeo-Christian backgrounds. So those would be the names he could remember because those were basically the main religions he was exposed to. Also, one has to bear in mind that when Muhammad started his preaching, who was his target audience? None other than the Jews and the Christians. So
Hmm.
logic dictates that one, the 25 names are biblical because those were the ones he was speaking to, or spoken of, or heard stories of, and two, the Jews and the Christians were his audience.
Right. Was he trying to convert them and thus to convince them of his prophethood?
There is, if he's going to appeal that he's come from the lineage of Abraham and that he's following the same religion of monotheism, and he's saying that he's a prophet that's been mentioned in their scriptures, then logic dictates he has to appeal to them. He has to get his audience. His audience are going to be those that are going to be familiar with the narrative that he's claiming to be in succession of. And he's also saying he's the seal of the prophets. So he
Right.
has to appeal to the Jews and the Christians.
You just mentioned something, and XYZ said, "Did Muhammad even exist?" Now, until that question can be answered definitively, I'm not really willing to dig in there. I mean, I can have an opinion like anyone, but until that's answered definitively, and it's very hard because obviously the records are, I think, deliberately vague. But you mentioned Thunderous that he's from the line of Abraham. At the moment, there's someone called Historical Christianity in the channel, and he sent me some information. And guys, I need to thank you all. So many of you have sent me very useful information, be it names of books, be it little pieces of information that have really opened up some doors for me or tied two seemingly disconnected pieces of information together. And also those who've offered some contributions. Thank you very much. All the help is appreciated. It really actually helps take my work forward in whatever way you contribute. But so, but you
Can
said
I
Abraham.
comment?
I looked at the Abraham thing, and it seems there's reason to suspect that he's not in the line of Abraham by any shape, way, or form. But I'll move on from there. Yeah,
But, just on those 2 points myself, I don't think anybody can credibly say that he is from Abraham via Ishmael. I
correct.
think there's no evidence to suggest, and we're going to be discussing that because the lineage is a relative point to the discussion that we're going to be having
Yeah,
tonight. And
yeah.
on the subject of whether Muhammad existed or not, I understand it. I'm 50-50 on it. When I listen to the evidence he did exist, I go that direction. And when I listen to the evidence that he didn't exist, I go in that direction. So, but irrelevant of whether he existed or not, 1.7 billion human beings believe he did exist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
those are
we
the
have to
people.
accept it as given, and we have to use the dates and the times and the events as references to tie what we do to. Exactly. We can't just throw it away and then be left with a blank.
Absolutely. So just going to the last question that I raised here that Muslims should be answering. It says, what lands do they go to? Now, this
Hmm.
is an interesting point because the further back in time you go, the population of humans reduces. For example, today
That
we
is
have,
true.
so for example, today on Earth, we have a population of 7.8 billion. In 1968, incidentally, the year I was born, we had 3.6 billion. And back in 1900, the human population on Earth was only 1.6 billion. And finally, just to give some kind of context, what I'm trying to get at, in the year 200, the estimated figure stands at 190 million. So, logic dictates that the further back in time we go, as the human population reduces, the need for a certain number of prophets, messengers per generation reduces too.
And you'll have fewer countries, fewer
That
you're going to have fewer organized communities.
absolutely, because that's actually one of the points as well. That, if I'll just from my notes, so this too is a problem because today on Earth we have 195 countries, but likewise with Earth's population, so further back in time we go, we find less countries listed. For example, in 1900, there are only 77 countries listed. So logic dictates the further back in time we go, as the number of humans were fewer, thus the number of nations will be reduced too. And that's kind of like that's in relationship to each other. If you had a family as a man and a woman, you have several children, that family is going to extend exponentially, requiring more property, more land in order to
Right.
exist. On the human family is no different. And there are going to be examples where human beings have gone to locations that for a period of time were not even known to exist.
Oddly interesting if you look at the maths, if you go back to the time of the Civil War in the US, there were only 2 million people in the country.
Mm.
I mean, so that's really few people if you consider it's 340 million today, plus about a billion illegal immigrants. And there were less than 2 million people in the US at that time. I mean, yeah, the earth would have been very sparse.
Yeah, so I think it's also what one should include in this as well. There is no mention in the Hebrew scriptures of God's prophets making mention of other prophets that have been sent forth with the message of monotheism to other alien foreign nations with the Mosaic law. Now, a Muslim could maybe say, well, Jonah did. Jonah went to Nineveh. Yeah, but that line of reason is kind of stupid because it shows ignorance of the Bible. Because the nation of Israel and the Assyrians were actually quite familiar with each other. One example is the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther shows that the Assyrians wanted to wipe out the nation of Israel with the contention between Mordecai and Haman. Now, Jonah going to Nineveh was because they were a city of bloodshed, and he didn't go with a message of monotheism trying to convert them. He went with a message, and anybody can read this in the 4 chapters of Jonah. He went there with a message saying, if basically God's going to destroy you unless you change your actions. So he did not go with a message speaking in their language. He spoke in Hebrew to the Ninevites saying, repent or you'll be destroyed. They repented. That is the message. That wasn't a message of a prophet going there trying to proselytize. And there's something interesting in this as well. They repented. What does that tell you about their knowledge of the God of the Israelites? It kind of shows they had some historical experience with the God of the Hebrews, because they responded to it. If it had been Zeus or Apollo or Superman, they wouldn't have responded because they would have known anything about them.
Very interesting. Yes.
So, and another thing as well, when we're talking about the further back in time you go, the number of nations reduces. You've only got to look at India. Once upon a time, it was India, but now India has been fragmented into Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kashmir, and Bangladesh, and India. So from one country, you've now got 5. So historically, we can look at this as well. I did want to make mention of something else as well. So on the side point, the media and education system and possibly the vagueness of some statements via political commerce and science and education give the impression that the world is overpopulated. This is a blatant lie, and that we could discuss that maybe another time. However, I make mention of this as language creates pictures in people's minds, thus resulting in mental images of metropolises abounding everywhere in the past, when in reality, the further back in time we go, humans were in fact very sparse, scattered, and separated on the earth. So this is another thing as well. When we look back in time, when we look at, say, certain Hollywood movies, let's say Gladiator, you get the impression that the world was very condensed and living in certain geographical locations, when the reality is the world was very scattered and human beings were very scattered and sparse. There were metropolises and world empires, certainly, but that's not strictly true. Many countries and locations are isolated as well, without communication from the rest of the world. So that kind of like needs to be borne in mind as well with 124,000 prophets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay, so if Muhammad was a prophet, the final prophet, the role for all mankind, then why is he not mentioned as well by any of by name by any of these other prophets that have gone to these other nations? And that's another thing Muslims need to try and reconcile. No other country or nation historically, when you consider the importance of Muhammad in Islam, ever makes mention of this one man that's going to come as the seal of the prophets. So you've had 123,999 prophets go to the rest of the world since Adam, and not one of them has mentioned Muhammad, yet he's supposed to be the most significant of them all. So just moving forward then, the 124,000 prophets is a significant number. Islam cites the Torah, the Psalms, and the Injil as canon. But considering the bastardization between the Bible and the Quran, Muslims simply have no choice but to resort to Muslim default of the Bible as being corrupted. So how are Muslims going to break down the figures? And this is what we need to get to. How are they going to break down 124,000? No other books are mentioned by Muhammad, as he does not know of their existence. Likely, if he existed, of course, he's making this up as he goes along. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, has no genealogy. And, Muslims wouldn't go there anyway, and if they did, you'd have to...
I have a question. Are all the prophets mentioned in just the 5 books of the Torah? Or are there additional prophets in the other books that are not named in the Torah?
Oh, the Torah is the first 5 books, yeah?
I know, but are there prophets that are outside of the Torah within all the other books?
Well, from a biblical or Judeo-Christian standpoint, absolutely. Jonah was. Isaiah. Isaiah's not mentioned.
Because the Quran technically or specifically only references the Torah. It does not recognize any of the other books of the Old Testament.
No.
Which means then, so if Allah only knows that, then, how do they get the names from the other books?
Well, this is the point. I mean, it only mentioned when I've had this discussion before with people, he's mentioned basically the main ones that are referenced. When you're speaking to, say, somebody of the Bible, normally in a normal conversation, you're naming the main ones, what I call the big hitters: David, Solomon, Moses, Abraham, or maybe Isaiah. You're talking about the big hitters. Malachi is not spoken of, is he? Jonah is very seldom mentioned. I mean, Jonah may be mentioned because of the situation and the likeness, if you like, of Jesus being dead for 3 days and the sign of Jonah. But other than that, the minor prophets aren't mentioned. It's always the big hitters that are being discussed. And I think this is why when you look at the Quran, you're only getting the big hitters mentioned. You're not getting the minor prophets mentioned, who too serve under the same God. And sometimes as contemporaries, you don't find Daniel mentioned in the book of in the Quran, do you?
Correct.
Because basically, when you think about it, Daniel's speaking of a contemporary time, but most of the information that you find that's in the book of Daniel is only talking about today. People would have read Daniel in, say, Muhammad's time, but there's no material in the book of Daniel in Muhammad's time that had a relevance for Muhammad's time. So likely people didn't talk about Daniel that much because the material wasn't relative. Daniel particularly talks about the last days, or the world powers going up to the last days.
Or maybe they left out those prophets that would give Muhammad a hard time, that would provide a contradictory narrative to what Muhammad was preaching, so maybe he left those guys out.
There's a possibility. I mean, if he's trying to reinvent Islam in his image, and we've had this discussion before, if he's trying to reinvent Islam or monotheism in his image, he's going to take those big hitters, as I call them, and mold them in his own image. He's going to take them and bastardize their image into his own image. So that could well be the reason why. But just moving forward, then it says, like, the Torah has no genealogy, the Psalms has no genealogy either. Then we come to what's known as the Injil. But in Islamic theology, the Injil was a written book given to Jesus by Allah, of which no copy exists. So no genealogy to see or read there. What we do have, though, are the 4 gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, this is a mess in itself for Muslims, because if the Injil is a separate book, a book that simply has no proof of ever existing, then how are they going to establish genealogy? So Muslims, Muslims and their scholars, obviously I'm including, via some desperate and peculiar form of osmosis and cognitive dissonance, are going to resort to quoting John 14:16, thereby implying, at least giving tacit authority to the Gospels. Yet they'll shy away from genealogy of Jesus, just as given in the book of Luke. Now, you're all probably thinking, why am I going on about genealogy? What has genealogy got to do with the discussion of 124,000 prophets? And in a moment, that's all going to make sense. So I mention it as though it's irrelevant, but when you look at the book of Luke, chapter 3, Jesus' genealogy from Adam to Jesus is 73. Bear that in mind. Adam to Jesus is 73 generations. Muhammad was born in 571 AD, 540 years after Jesus. And we know for certain that there was no other prophets after Jesus, unless Muslims can prove otherwise, as the Quran makes no mention of any between Jesus and Muhammad. So there is a void of Allah provided prophets for 540 years. This is a significant point. Islam has no genealogy in any of its sources. All its claims are invention, fabrication, lies, or good old-fashioned bull excrement. So how can we make sense of this? Well, using the internet and research tools, we can see what Muslims are saying. The line of descent we are looking for is Adam to Muhammad. The names are mostly irrelevant, as most of them will be invention, or they will just cite some Jewish names so as to legitimize the illegitimate prophet. Muslims have no choice but to cite the usual suspects, obviously Adam, Noah, and Abraham, and then proceed to invent the others. However, they have provided a different genealogy, and without exception, all Muslim sources have Islamic genealogy from Adam to Muhammad as being 21. Think about it.
21.
Adam to Jesus is 73. And we've got that list in the book of Luke. I think there's one in the book of Matthew as well. One goes from Mary's lineage to David, and the other one goes from Joseph's lineage to David. So when a Muslim says, well, you got two genealogies, one contradicts the other, the simple response to that is one follows the historical narrative from David to Mary's lineage and genealogy, and the other one is from David to Joseph's lineage. That's why some of the names differ. It's not a contradiction. God made a prophet to David that from his seed. So the promise was fulfilled. It's a desperate lie on Muslims. Just an interesting point there. Anyway, moving forward, this is a pathetic demonstration of desperation. Most of the names are fabricated in the genealogy anyway, so the compilers may as well have invented, may have made up a number that makes sense. After all, once you've started lying, why stop? So I think the point I'm trying to make there is, once you've started lying, what difference does it make? You've now invented a genealogy for Muhammad based on nothing. You've extrapolated it from thin air. Why stop at 21? Surely somebody must have realized this at some point and thought, this just doesn't make sense. I mean, we've got the genealogy of Jesus being 73. Why have you got to Muhammad from Adam, who's 540 years later, only 21?
That's a very strange number. It should be more. It should be 74 or something like that.
Well, no, it should be 90.
Yeah, exactly, because it's 500 years, so it's a number of other generations. Yes.
It should be about another, say, 20, 30 generations in that. Right then, yeah. So where are we? If Christians had made up the number of 24,000 prophets, we can calculate an average for the whole human family on earth by dividing the figure by 73 generations to Jesus' genealogy. However, the Bible makes no such ludicrous claim. Therefore, trying to make sense of it, I'm simply trying to help Muslims out. So to understand, to make sense of this, we have based on the Hadith on 23,909 prophets from Adam till Jesus, Muhammad being the 124,000th prophet. So what we've got to do here then is 21 generations, but so Adam was one generation, Jesus was one generation, Muhammad was one generation. So you have to take those three generations away from 21 and you come to the number 18. Yeah?
Right.
Right. Also, in Islamic parlance, Adam was a prophet. Jesus was obviously a prophet, and Muhammad was a prophet. So you have to take those three from 124,000, and you get 123,997. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So 18 generations from Adam being the first prophet and Muhammad being the last means we have to divide 123,997 prophets, messengers by 18 generations. This gives us a figure of 6,889 prophets per generation. Let that
How
sink
many?
in.
Say that number again, please.
6,889 prophets per generation.
6,889. Wouldn't there be some historical record of that many?
Well, I was going to elaborate on that later on. But the thing is, bear in mind that that's per generation. So Adam was the first prophet. There was no other contemporary for Adam other than his wife. So the next generation obviously would have been their children. It would have
Right.
required Adam to have tens of thousands of children in order to have 6,889 prophets in the next generation. This is being generous, though, when you think about it, Lloyd, because if I reduce the figure, what does that mean? I'm increasing the figure elsewhere. That's
Mm-hmm.
all it means. So I'm trying to average this out. So helping Muslim out again, let's assume that each prophet lived as the previous died, and assuming that the average service lifespan of each prophet was 10 years, that is to say, 10 years serving as a prophet. Biblically, Jesus only had a 3.5 year ministry.
Mm-hmm.
This would also this would also give us a figure from Adam, Islam's first prophet, and incidentally 90 foot tall, but that's another subject.
Yeah.
To
Well,
Muhammad,
within the Bible, is Adam a prophet? Because I don't
not
think so.
not
No?
in a, no, not in a, nobody would have seen Adam as a prophet, because in what sense would he have been a prophet? He would have been just the father and first man of all
And a
mankind.
prophet to whom? To his wife?
Yeah, exactly.
When they were talking directly to God? Like,
Yeah. But the thing is, you see, yeah, but in Islamic parlance, though, Lloyd, Adam fell out
yeah.
of, or he was kicked out of heaven, wasn't he? He was in the spirit realm first, and then he came to the
Yes.
physical realm. Yeah, that's a subject in itself as well.
Right.
So Muhammad, the seal of prophets. So if you give each prophet, say, a 10-year lifespan as a prophet. Now, as an example, Muhammad served 20 years as a prophet. In the biblical narrative, Moses, I think, served, how many was it? 80 years as a prophet.
That's still 1,240,000 years.
That's you've worked it out. 1,240,000 years, and that in itself is a problem, because then you have to divide 1,240,000 by the generations to understand the times. Like how long each person would have lived then.
Yeah. So Muslims have to explain if they were sequential or if they were
If they were
simul-
which was contemporaries of each other, then you have
yeah,
6,889 prophets
per
at any one
generation.
time. Yes, but
Otherwise,
if
you've got a million years to explain. Good grief, they've got problems.
yeah, what 1.2 million over 21 generations, though.
Good
That's the
grief.
problem. You've got to remember, from Adam to Muhammad is 21 generations. So 1.2 million over 21 generations.
That comes to 59,000.
Yes, yeah, I did. Yeah, I've got that figure down here as well.
Good
You've
grief.
you've got there as well. Excellent. So reducing the service years of each prophet to 1 year would still have 124,000 years of continuous service of prophets. So if you have one prophet serving a year, then he does his year, another one takes over. He does a year, another one takes over. He does a year. That still has 124,000 years over 21 generations.
That's incredible. And biblical history doesn't extend more than what, 5,000 years?
6,000 years, 6,050 years, I think we're at the moment, around about
Wow. In the
6,040
Jewish
something.
calendar, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that. Yeah. So these numbers are. Okay. Yeah. Clearly doesn't make sense.
Or even by being generous to Muslims and giving them a total of 43 generations. So I've taken 21, I've added another 21, and I've plus the one as well. So 43. So it's 21, 21 plus one generations from Adam to Muhammad will equate to 2,883 prophets per generation. This figure simply does not fit with the number of countries, nations at the time in pre-Jesus or Earth's population of humans. Simply put, the numbers don't stack. Now, a Muslim could just turn around and say, well, that's a weak hadith. Yeah, but you and I know,
They
Lloyd.
do actually. That's their major defense. Oh, I can go into that later. Yeah.
Yeah, but weak hadith is not false hadith, is it? If it's
Correct.
weak, it's still true.
A weak is still true. In fact, it's more true than false. It's more likely to be true, and therefore it's not
Yes.
false.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a hadith about Muhammad, and in fact, different scholars rate them differently. One may make it sahih.
Yeah, exactly that. You see, so the arguments that they use against it don't work. And the interesting thing is, the only person that's going to turn around and say it's a weak hadith is who? It's the person or the Muslim that you're standing in front of
Yeah.
saying this to.
In fact, there's another set of hadiths that state that the Messenger of Allah said, Allah sent 8,000 prophets, 4,000 to the children of Israel, and 4,000 to the rest of mankind.
Yeah, I saw that one as well.
That's in
And
Muslim Ahmed. So
yeah, that's the problem with it, because when you start going into those realms, even that doesn't make sense. But the thing is, 4,000 to the nation of Israel. That's just, how did you get that? Where did you get that from? But the thing
they
is,
made it
when,
up.
yeah, absolutely. I just want to comment on this as well. It says that none of these so-called holy books sound anything like each other. The Bhagavad Gita sounds nothing like the Avesta sounds nothing like the
Yeah, you'd think they'd have
Tripitaka.
a consistent message, right? They would all be teaching a similar message if they're from Allah.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. And the parallel I'm going to use is Noah's flood. Now, if 123,999 prophets had gone forward with the same message, we would see some consistency in the books that they claim to be holy, right? And logic dictates in Islamic parlance they've all been corrupted. With no evidence, they've just been corrupted because they don't agree with the Quran. Yet there is another narrative that abounds around the world. It's very similar, not the same. The details may change slightly from one to another, but in principle, it's exactly the same, and that's Noah's flood. Wherever you go in the world, there is an account or a narrative of Noah's flood. In essence, the world was bad. Somebody built a boat. They got on the boat. God brought
Hmm.
a flood. All the wicked people died. They survived. You get variations of it, but you've got a theme to it, if that makes sense. With the 123,909 prophets that Islam has put forward, you don't find any consistency
So,
anywhere.
so Nathaniel just mentioned, look, you've said that basically all these prophets went to a different nation with a different language, right, in their own region and their own time. And Nathaniel says they are not even close to 124,000 languages.
But we're being generous though,
Yeah.
Lloyd. We're being generous because when you use the term land, I think, or nation, I think it's fair to say you can say that land had its own language as well. Fine, you can go to some lands and they have one main language. I think India is an example where Hindi is their main language, but they've probably got about 3,000 dialects. But the interesting thing is that
Mm.
even when you go to those countries, they still understand the main language. But being generous, and let's say we gave two languages per nation, the further back in time you go, the less nations there were. You still can't have that many thousands of languages amongst that fewer nations. That doesn't make sense. And language, we've known, evolves with time. It doesn't evolve going backwards, it evolves coming forwards.
Onwards.
So
Yeah.
logic dictates going back in time means that there'll be less languages anyway.
Right.
Also, it says here that well, what I've written down is that there is no record of any of these prophets going with a message of strict monotheism. No one appearing with miracles has ever been recorded. Too worth noting, Islam considers prophets to be pure and incapable of sin. So, to have no record of 123,000 plus messengers of men going forward to all these nations with no books, no miracles, no warnings,
Hmm.
and being pure human beings, because
Perfect.
yeah,
Yes.
perfect human beings, it's very hard to believe that these kind of men went forward. It's when you go to a second-hand shop and you buy a jigsaw and there's pieces missing. This is like the brain of a Muslim and their scholars. It's like buying one of those second-hand jigsaws. There are just so many pieces missing that you can't see. The picture doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
You know,
no,
it's,
you're right. I mean, so there's someone in the chat who's saying that he's making little assertions, and some of the name of Brutus Albion. We will need evidence. We'll need more than assertions. I'll be honest.
assertions. Well, we're asking questions based on logic. How can anybody reconcile 123,999 prophets with 21 generations? That is what Islam teaches, 21
So
generations.
over 6,000 years, you're looking at these numbers of prophets. You know, if you want to look at it from the biblical timescale, and so there must be some sort of historical record of this. And where is this record? I mean, these questions. I mean, these are, and of course, Islam. Their major defense is, well, Allah knows best.
That may well be the case, but we've discussed that as well, Lloyd, and that is that Islam has had 500 years more worldly experience than, say, Christianity has, being that it came about in the 6th century. So,
Well, remember, there was
for
no
you,
prophet. Don't forget, there was no prophet after Muhammad. So that's 1400 years. Wave goodbye. And there was no prophet between Muhammad and Jesus, so that's another 600 years, wave goodbye. So that's 2,000 years gone. That leaves you with 4,000 years in the biblical timescale. So in
Mhm.
fact, you have to chop off 1/3 of your available time, and you're left with 4,000 years.
But the thing is, you don't find it using the same things. When someone says, well, Muslims say Allah knows best, but you don't find Judeo-Christianity responding like that, and that's the point. Judeo-Christianity doesn't respond with responses like, well, God knows best. We don't. Nobody talks like that, but Muslims do. But Muslims have the advantage. They've got 540 years after Jesus more history to establish its truths,
Yeah,
to establish these numbers.
I've just put this Brutus Albion character in timeout because the very simple thing is that he was talking about what about shamans and things like that in Malaysian culture, and Islam has its own definitions. We've just mentioned them for these. These people have to meet this criteria, and those do not. So please pay attention. I'm really absolutely not interested in your own meanderings and wanderings. Stick to the facts, stick with the topic.
The thing is, by saying shamans, do shamans teach monotheism?
No.
And the thing is as well. Now, this is something else to bear in mind. For 1,500 years, right, from Moses to Jesus, the only form of worship that was acceptable to God was Judaism and the Mosaic Law, the animal sacrifices, the Day of Atonement, for instance, the Festival of Booths, all those things was the only acceptable worship to God. But we only find that in the Middle East with the nation of Israel. We do not find any of these things taking place anywhere else in the world, or somebody during that 1,500 year period of time of Israel's history of other individuals being sent by Allah taking the Mosaic Law there. Because that at that period of time would have been the only worship God accepted was via the Mosaic Law and the priesthood. Why is that not mentioned?
There's a lack of detail. I mean, look, you're the expert here. I'm just following you because I'm trying to keep up with you on this. And I mean, you're the expert on this one. But there certainly is a lack of detail. There's a lack of evidence. There are certainly, you know,
But the thing is, this is because it's a lie, Lloyd. The
yeah.
number's made up. I think the figure of 124,000 is quite interesting as well because I've done some research on this, and some prophets, sorry, not some prophets, I'll make a retraction. That some scholars have said it comes from the number of 144,000. Now, you and I have discussed this. I think Muhammad probably heard the number 144,000 because it comes from the Bible book of Revelation, chapter 7.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking in symbolic sense of 12,000 times 12,000, 144,000. I think Muhammad probably
Okay.
got the figure from there. Maybe it was he heard 144,000, or maybe he heard 124,000, totally misunderstood what the context was and thought it was prophets going into the world, or he's basically said that added his own twist on it. I think
That's
also
true.
when you think about it, 124,000 prophets going forward kind of really emphasizes how important he is as a prophet, that he is the seal of the prophets, that Allah sent
That's a very valid point. It's a very strong point. Yes.
that Allah sent 123,999 prophets. They've all failed, but this is the one that succeeds. Now, do you remember I think it's the hadith where Muhammad talks about Moses being very upset with Muhammad because the number of people following Muhammad in number was greater than the number of people that followed Moses, and Moses was upset with that. Do you remember that hadith?
I'm not sure if I actually know that one, but that's interesting.
Yeah, so there is a hadith that it's definitely it's only just come to my mind now during this discussion that yeah, that Moses was upset with Muhammad. I think it must have been on the Hijra when he went on the winged ass to heaven, Allah's brothel, and that's where he met Moses. And I
We
think
need to
it's in
look this up. Yeah, guys, if you find the hadith, please drop it in the comments later. And that's interesting. Definitely one for the collection. But this is Muhammad aggrandizing himself, which would be consistent with everything else.
with everything that he has done so far in his life,
Yeah.
his aggrandizement and redacting and retrospectively fitting himself in the past so as to apply the narrative to himself in the present as it was at the time.
Wow,
And he,
man. Yeah, I mean, how does Islam square this circle? How do the scholars? I mean, I could answer that. I've got something here from Islam QA, and what they do is they talk about how the scholars differ over the validity of these hadith, calling them da'if, calling them some saying they're sahih, and so they quote all the scholars that call it da'if, but da'if still means authoritative.
yeah,
And then what they do is on more than one occasion they say what has been narrated about the number of prophets is not correct. Allah knows best. No one knows their number except Allah, and they keep going. And then the number of prophets was 124,000, and the number of messengers was 313. And it was also narrated that the number of prophets was 8,000. And then they say here, it is better to refrain from discussing this matter, so rather don't discuss it. And they say, believe in those prophets whose names were mentioned by Allah and His Messenger, and believe in the rest only in general terms. And it says here that we believe in every prophet and every messenger, but each one's message was for the people of his own time, and we believe in them in general terms, and Allah knows best. And it also
no,
says here that the number of books was supposed to be 104 holy books.
104. I
Holy
would like to
books.
see what were these books? What languages were they in? Where did
Exactly.
they?
So their thing is, look, let's not talk about it. Allah knows best. Just believe in what's in the Quran. Thanks. Have a nice day. Without it, where are the answers? Where are the clear answers? Why don't, if they know everything, why don't they admit we don't know? I mean, so this is very, it's unethical at best and deceitful at worst.
Even if you was to take the number of say 8,000 per, in Islamic parlance, like God's Allah sent 8,000 prophets, that's still 380 per generation.
Wow.
In fact, I've made an error there. Hang on, it's 8,000 divided by 18. That's 444 prophets per generation. Even, so whatever figure they give, the number doesn't stack.
Yeah. No, it can't stack. So they try and get out of it by making these weak excuses. Look, don't question it. Don't discuss it. Just accept what's in the Quran. But I thought Allah's never wrong. We're supposed to believe the whole Quran because the whole Quran is literally the word of Allah.
But,
And
but the thing is, Lloyd, with that, you'll notice this because there is a had I had the presence of mind, I'll have brought my notes out. There is an ayah in the Quran that where Allah is saying, "Don't ask questions because they'll
Mhm.
cause you trouble."
Right.
If you gave me 5 minutes, I'll go and get the
Oh,
note.
no, I know what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're
So,
all
so
familiar
for
with that. Yeah.
asking, in effect, what I'm saying is asking questions in the Quran, and it's repeated, and you get the sense of this about 5 or 6 times where you find ayah that say Allah and His Messenger, Allah and His Messenger. It behooves anyone who questions Allah and His Messenger. It's always this 50-50 relationship.
Hmm.
And you get the idea, do not question, just accept and submit. Yet look at the opposite point. Look at what the Bible says. When you go to Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 to 5, it talks about digging for things as if for hidden treasure. In the Sermon on the Mount, I think it's Matthew 7, or it could be Matthew 10, I stand corrected. But it does say, keep on seeking, keep on knocking, keep on asking. With the Judeo Christian um, way of the way that God wanted you to follow his code of conduct, asking questions was imperative. Asking questions was important because the more questions you ask, you get more answers and it builds your faith.
Hmm.
Yet Islam is discouraging questions. Who would not want you to ask questions about your faith?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to start asking, so what is your evidence for these prophets? How did Muhammad know this? Where did he get this information? Why is it not mentioned in any other sources? Which historical or other cultural sources mention this? I mean, all of this is, these are all very specious claims with no substantive basis in anything that we know of.
And even if we couldn't make, even if Islam couldn't confirm the validity of the 124,000, and this is the angle that I wanted to come with, even if they couldn't confirm the validity, or if they could, that's an irrelevance. The fact of the matter still stands. You've got 123,997 prophets that you've got to divide between 18 generations. The numbers don't stack. It doesn't stack historically, one, through public population growth. Two, it doesn't stack through the numbers of countries that have come into existence as a result of how you move forward in time. Either the
Yeah, and
numbers.
they've got 4,000 years to make it fit as well. That's a lot of prophets they put into 4,000 years.
Well, that's a lot of prophets in there. That's a lot of generations for 4,000 years. But that's assuming that you're assuming. No, I don't mean that disrespectfully, but that's predicated on Islam believing the biblical narrative of man's creation in the Garden of Eden, which is about 6,000 years plus as it
True, but if
stands.
there was zero people on Earth prior, then who were these prophets going to?
Well, yet again, if you believe, listen to what Yasakadi says, there were lots of jinn around on the planet, and they had their own prophets too.
There was a lot of jinn, you can tell, right?
Yeah,
A
yeah.
whole lot of jinn. There was definitely
Whole
some
lot of
good
jinn,
jinn going around there.
London jinn, Belgian jinn.
Oh, good grief. Oh, good grief. That is insane. No, I mean these questions, just the questions. I mean, one would want clear answers. You'd want definite answers. And don't forget, the Quran or Islam rejects the Bible. It says the Bible's corrupted, so it would reject the Bible's lineage and genealogy. So then, where's theirs?
And why did they not have one as well? If Muhammad
Yeah,
is the most important prophet of all, you don't find this message of monotheism going out into the world. You don't find for the 1500 years that Judaism was in practice that going out into the whole world. And you don't find Muhammad as some kind of like you have in the Mosaic law and in the Hebrew scriptures, you have the Messiah spoken of quite clearly. It's probably about 250 prophecies pertaining to Jesus. Yet if Muhammad is more important than Jesus, there should be a myriad upon myriad references in the known world from 123,999 men
yeah.
going forward with
Especially
this.
if they had a consistent message. If they were preaching the same message, that message should be universal, and it's clearly not the case.
That goes back to my point about why I brought Noah's flood up. Noah's flood
Is the only
is like is the example that Islam, we should have some narrative very similar to Noah's flood, that there was a world full of wicked people. God warned them, they didn't listen, so his true people or the true family built an ark, they got on it, the flood came and swept all the wicked people away. That narrative is around the world for centuries. Even today we still believe it, but we do not
yeah.
have anything of these 123,997 prophets. Not even like it. This goes back to what I was saying
Yeah.
earlier on about the
I mean,
Avesta, the Tripitaka, or the Bhagavad Gita. Those books sound nothing like
like
anything. They don't sound like, even if you was to take those books and bastardize them like they were once monotheism, and now you've got the Avesta. How perverted does it have to be that you could take
yeah.
monotheism and turn it into the Avesta?
It's aggrandizement. They want to claim that they were universal, that this is the religion for the whole world, and he's the one that got it right. But yeah, man, it's hubris on a monumental scale. It's the audience is really lapping this up. I think they've really you've hit the few, you've really hit the home run here. People are going like, yeah, we've never thought about this, and we need answers from Muslims. We need evidence. We can't simply accept Allah knows best. That red line that Yasir Qadi spoke about, that's your red line, not mine. Right? It's not ours.
And the thing is, it's not just a case of Allah knows best. It's a case of, they'll lie and, wiggle room their way out of it by saying weak hadith. It's the fact of it is you have to stand strong and say, no, this is what your prophet said. I know it's slightly off topic, but
Mm.
as an example, it's a bit like when you speak to a Muslim and you're talking about Dul Qarnayn and the sun setting in a muddy pool, and they will try and say, they have their wiggle room of, well, you have to read it in Arabic because it can only ever be understood in Arabic. Okay, okay then. So let's look at it in Arabic. Then you're still talking about wajada. Wajada means perspective. All right. If that's if that's how you want to infer the word, because obviously in Islamic parlance, each Arabic word can have 10 different meanings. So you can pretty much make
Hmm.
what you want out of whatever verse is in the Quran. But that's not the way we should look at Islam. For me, it's always been a case of, okay, then that talks about the sun setting in a muddy pool. The sun is a star. Let's look at all the other texts Islam has about stars. Oh, we've got one over there that says stars are shooting missiles. Oh, we've got one over here that says that the sun prostrates itself before the throne of Allah and asks permission to go on its rounds again. So clearly, when you start putting all the text together of what Islam teaches about stars between the Quran and the Hadith, any Muslim that turns around and says it was from his perspective clearly does not understand Islam. He does not understand what the Arabic is himself then, and is clearly lying. Because all those texts, when you start referring to stars or of the subject of stars being
Hmm.
spoken of, they are speaking of something not that we know of. They have the ability to talk, they have the ability to make decisions. These are physical objects that can harm creatures in the spiritual dimension, which incidentally the Bible, I think it's the Bible book of Kings, actually mocks when um,
Yeah, but in
Elijah.
Islam, if you look at the Sharia, stars are objects with minds.
Yes, exactly
Yeah,
that.
it's insane.
So
It's nuts.
absolutely. This is so like there is a principle. Let Scripture interpret Scripture. So that is to say that if you look trying to understand something in Scripture between Genesis and Revelation, you would use other scriptures to come to a conclusive or roundabout bigger picture as to what you're trying to understand.
Hmm.
When you're doing that with Islam, it actually makes things worse, not better. That's why
Right.
it's always don't ask questions, don't do any further research, don't take it. You find that the context, and you're very good at this, Lloyd, in your past shows, you've proven this to be the case, where you stand back and you look at something and you bring out 3 or 4 pieces of material on that one theme, and it gives you a bigger picture as to what Islam is actually saying on that particular subject. The same has to be done on these other things as well, even the minor
Awesome.
things in Islam.
No, you're right. I think you've raised some really powerful questions. Things that there's no satisfactory answers. There are none, and Muslims need to provide satisfactory answers if they claim this is the perfect word of Allah. So
We haven't even started on 90 for Adam yet.
yeah,
I've got that as a discussion. If ever you want to recall me to the show, I've got 90
I'd
for
love to.
Adam.
No, I need to start winding down. Unfortunately, I have to wind down to do some things and then start another show soon. But that's brilliant. So yeah, guys, any last question? I've got very limited time, but everyone seems to really. I've seen several comments where people said that they've never thought about it or looked at this issue from that perspective, and they see the problems in the narrative, the holes in the narrative. And
Oh
any
yeah,
last comment from you because I need to wind up.
yeah. It's not holes in the narrative. It's a narrative with a lot of holes.
Right, you're right. It's a
Sorry,
narrative.
I said I
It's
was being
yeah.
facetious there, but I would just on a final point, I would like to say thank you, Lloyd, for having me on the show. I'd like to thank your audience for tuning in and listening, and I hope that the material has been of some kind of benefit. And I look forward to an opportunity of being on the show again in sometime in the future.
Yeah, no, no, thank you. I think in about 3 weeks. Yeah, guys, just so you know, next Friday I'm gonna be traveling. I'll be away for a week, so I'm unlikely to be available at all. And so I'm away between the 8th and the 17th. So after that, I'll be available again. And yeah, we can chat about this. But this has really been fascinating. And yeah, I would love to see the sources and the evidence to back up this claim, because the answers that satisfy a Muslim should not satisfy a sophisticated audience who wants evidence.
Well, the only answer that satisfies a Muslim's audience is Allah knows best.
Best.
That is the only
Yeah.
answer they can ever have on this.
No, you're right. You're right. This is actually. I mean, seriously, I'm sitting here and I'm trying to process. I mean, we spoke earlier, but I'm still trying to process. I'm like, it boggles my mind. I would never buy this if I was told this. I'd like, no, this makes no sense.
Well, that's why they don't discuss it, because nobody would buy it if it was spoken of like this.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, good grief, good grief. Yeah, it's just the more I think about it, it's like Islam hurts my brain. So yeah, I have to end. We have to end. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. I hope towards the end of this month we can do another show and discuss the 90-foot Adam, and then come on and talk about atheism you were discussing as well, because there's some
Yes,
very pertinent points you've made that I think are very relevant. And also, it's just the methodology you bring that's worth the questions that you're asking that everyone else should listen to and then ask the same questions.
excellent. Thank you very much, Lloyd. It would be a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Okay, guys, thank you. I will see you guys in about 35 minutes for the next show. And yeah, I hope that was interesting. I think it was incredible. So yeah, thanks to the Thunderous One, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye bye.